So Ajith, would you like to start by just telling us a little bit more of your background? You've mentioned that you've been Youth for Christ director, national director in Sri Lanka. Can you kind of fill in the story a little bit more for us?
Well, I heard God. I think I felt a call to ministry when I was about 14 years old, and ever since then I wanted to minister. Went to university and then went to theological college. And while I was in theological college, I was really wondering what I should do, whether I should go to a church or whether I should go to Youth for Christ, with which I was involved from my teens. And a lot of my lecturers were saying, don't go to, you must be a pastor or teach in a seminary or something. But my pastor, who was an Irishman actually, for some time he was there, he said, let him go to Youth for Christ. He can send people into the church. And that's what I've been doing now for 38 years, almost 39. And so we work primarily with first generation Christians, Buddhist, Hindu, some from Catholic background. But most of them are very raw people from the slums. A lot of them can't read or write. So that's been my grassroots ministry has been in that area.
Wow. So I've been to Sri Lanka 3 times. I don't know if you knew that, but love it as a country. I love visiting, love the food. But every time I've been there, people have said to me, the biggest problem is that people leave and they don't come back.
Yeah.
You left, but you came back. Is that right? You said you studied in America?
Yeah.
So
actually, it was never a problem to me. I always felt that this is where God wanted me. So there were some invitations, especially from America, to come to seminaries to teach. I didn't even give a day's, It's very frustrating when you want to be a writer and study when you're living in a poor country. Very difficult to find time. But I always, and they, these Americans, when they offer jobs, we'll give you so much time to study, so many free months a year, you can, all of that. But I never felt that it was for me. My wife and I both felt that we were called to live and die in Sri Lanka, and that's where we are going to live.
That's great. And you have 2 children?
Yeah.
And so they're grown now?
Yes, they're grown. My son is also a Youth for Christ staff worker.
Okay.
And my daughter is married to one of our staff workers. So we are all Youth for Christ people.
That's great. So you mentioned writing. So you've written how many books? Quite a few, right?
16, I think.
16, okay.
Yeah.
So that's everything from sort of paperback little books to big, huge commentaries. Which do you enjoy the most?
I like to write.
Yeah.
Finding the time is a problem. But all of my books have come out of my ministry. They are things that I have done. Mm-hmm. Before I started my work, I really studied Acts, and I thought we'll try and develop a movement that follows the model of Acts. And I wanted to write a commentary on a book on Acts. Maybe 15 after trying out for 15 years. And then, of course, about 3-4 years after I started my ministry, my wife and I helped start a church. And so we are part of that church. We've been there for about 35 years now. So we tried to apply Acts both at the church and in Youth for Christ. And then finally, much later, it was after about 20 years, that I did get an invitation to write a commentary on Acts from Zondervan.
Right.
And so like that, it's all come out of my ministry.
Yeah.
In the early years, the church wasn't going out. The church was actually dropping. Numerically, we were going down. The Christians in Sri Lanka were going down. And liberalism had a huge, we were past the colonial past and all of that. So liberalism was quite strong. People were denying the uniqueness of Christ. And so in those early years, that's what I wrote on, because that's what the church needed in Sri Lanka. So I wrote a book on hell, crucial questions about hell, the supremacy of Christ, sharing the truth in love, which was all about we've got to take the gospel out. And then once people started going, they needed to be ministered to. So the next batch of books that I've written have been in that sphere, ministering to those who have gone to share.
That's great. So you planted a church? Or?
Yeah, it's a Methodist church, which had dropped down to zero. Nobody had come there. So a couple who were converted from our ministry, from a Buddhist background, and my wife and I, we went there and we started. So we have, it's a small church, we have our own pastor now, but it's about 70 to 80% Buddhist converts. And they're from urban, poor.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you preach in that church
Yes,
as well?
I preach about once a month or less than that. And I lead worship about also, several times a year. But I do a regular Bible study in that church with men. And so that is where my grassroots is a lot in that church. I do a lot of visiting when people are sick, and when there are fights, I try to intervene. So a lot of my grassroots ministry now is in the church.
Right. So just give us a snapshot of the situation in Sri Lanka. Obviously, this is European Leadership Forum. We're thinking a lot about Europe, but as a country, what can we be praying for Sri Lanka?
Well, we are just after a war, and the war was won by the government, but there really wasn't peace that worked out after that. So now we have a new government that the leader is a person of integrity, I think, the president, but it's a coalition, and is unable to really move things forward. So things are quite confused. But since the war started in the early 80s, and we have had, the church has started growing. The church was we got independence in 1948. And from 48 to about 80, the church just dropped. Then, 85 or 90 maybe, suddenly the church started going again through the war. And so now people have gone out, quite a lot have gone out, and we are facing a new challenge in that those who have gone out are not cared for, and there are a lot of casualties along the way, financially, burnout, situations of burnout, sexual sin, and things like that. So since I gave up my job as the director of Youth for Christ, now I'm giving about 60% to the churches just to minister to pastors.
Great.
So that's one of the big needs now. People have gone out. There was severe persecution. It's less under this government. So with that, there have been a lot of challenges to face.
And the persecution coming from all sides, or just
from the Buddhist? We have Buddhist, Hindu, and Muslim. So Buddhists attack the Sinhalese people are Buddhist. So they attack the Sinhalese converts, churches where there are converts in Sinhala. The Tamils are Hindus, so there is attack there. And the Buddhists are now attacking the Muslims because the Muslims are growing in the country. And so the Christians and the Buddhists Christians and the Muslims are together as being co-attacked. We are both being attacked by the same groups.
Wow. Difficult situation.
Yeah.
So over the years, thinking about your ministry, you've obviously there's Youth for Christ, there's church, there's writing. Then there's the kind of the speaking, the international speaking. How did that develop?
I don't know. I think when I was in seminary, some of my professors sort of recommended me for a meeting here or there. And then people got to know about me, and that's how I think it just developed over the years. I've never taken it as a major part of my life. I feel that my work is as a grassroots ministry, and that whatever I preach has to come out of ministry. So I've always kept it at a fair distance it's never my major ministry. In fact, I almost never get to speak in English anymore because I work with Sinhala speaking people. So that I enjoy because English is my first language.
Really? Okay.
I'm most fluent in English.
Great. So do you think there's a danger in terms of you're doing your main ministry, like you call it the grassroots ministry, but you're getting these invitations that are more prestigious, more attractive maybe in some way. Is that a danger that you felt for yourself, and do you see that for others? We're a group of preachers, teachers. Is that something we need to think about?
Yeah, I have always felt that I'm under a community. I'm part of Youth for Christ. Even after I left the director job, I'm still on staff. And I have a group of people that I'm accountable to. They help me with deciding the criteria for taking on. So right now I travel 15% of the year, 16% of the year. And more than 50% must be in Asia. So these are all criteria to make sure that I'm staying close to my call. Mm-hmm. So once that fills up, I won't take anything more. But I think the biggest challenge to me as a traveling person has been, hotels are difficult places, television is very bad sometimes, especially in Europe. I don't know how you people manage. But, I have to, my accountability group, for example, I sent, after my first night here, I pulled out my plug from the television and I haven't put it on again, I won't. So that I write to them and to my wife saying I have pulled the plug out so that they know that this is, because that's where the traveling, when you're traveling alone, I've always recommended people to travel with others. But when I do my travel abroad, I can't afford to go with another. So that's a big challenge.
Do you think, is that a challenge that just remains constant through all the decades of life?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's no hope for us young people that it's going to fade.
And my friends have been so helpful to me. They are the ones who helped me. And knowing that I have to report to them has been a great deterrent, I would say.
What are some of the other dangers that you feel and that you see other preachers, teachers struggling with?
Another danger of traveling ministry is that, when you're traveling, you're a celebrity, you speak to big crowds and things like that. When you go home, everybody knows you, there's nothing special about you. And you can tend to want that, and, to have colleagues and to be constrained by having to work with people, work with programs, work with organizations that move very slowly. So the temptation could be to think that this is the best life. Whereas, in my church, at the moment, I'm very involved in my church, and so many fights, you know what churches are like, Christians fighting with each other, and then we have to go and try and bring peace, and it's so time consuming. Sometimes I come home at 12 o'clock in the night because the leader is upset with the pastor for having said something or something like that, and trying to keep them. But I know that that's what ultimately, that is what helps my preaching. I have to study the word, but putting the word together is these experiences, mainly the experiences of failure, because when you fail, you have to keep asking yourself, what went wrong? Why did this happen? How could we have avoided this? I've worked with some people. There's a guy in my small group. He's about 45 years now. And I have tried to disciple him for about 20 years. And he's a drug addict. And he's in and out. Half of that 20 years he has been in prison. And I learned so much from that. This morning he sent me a text message to say I'm doing okay. We have this agreement that he'll write to me regularly. But working with him I have learned so much from those failures, from those difficulties. And sometimes to think of ministry as easy, and things like that, that can be a big danger.
What do you find the most discouraging in your life ministry as a teacher? What are the biggest discouragements?
I don't know, I live with discouragement all the time. People I work with, you want them to be godly, you want them to give godly responses, and very often that doesn't happen. I had a nice experience from the airport. I was so down when I was leaving, because one of the guys was like a child to me. He's like my son. He comes from the slums and now become a leader, and he was hurt with somebody, and I told him you must talk to him, and he had refused to talk to him because he says he's not honest, I don't want to talk to him. So I left Colombo feeling really sad, just feeling down actually. After all these years of teaching him, how come he doesn't? And then my successor, he's the leader of Youth for Christ now, he sent me an email to say, this guy met with this fellow and we ended up peacefully. So that's been very helpful. I mean, those are encouraging, but trying to, I mean, the Bible gives us quite an example of community life, and trying to develop, to get people who are willing to follow that community life has been very difficult. I mean, when I started in Youth for Christ, it was, we had about 7 staff, and we were one family and very, united and all of that. Now we have about 80. And to try and have the same kind of accountability, spiritual accountability, in the different segments, you can't. Now we don't know everybody. Trying to press that has been very difficult, but I have tried strenuously to do that. And very often for our administration, we get people who are from the business world, they come to serve us. And they find it very difficult to understand the time we have to spend to maintain community. Maintaining community life is very time consuming. And, just send him a letter, or something like that, but, that's not the way we work in the body of Christ. And so trying to apply the body theology to a Youth for Christ setting, and even harder in a church setting. We are from the Methodist tradition, and in our tradition, pastors change every 3-4 years. We get a new pastor, which makes it very difficult, because you develop a culture of accountability, of spiritual fellowship, and then somebody else comes, and so that's been a real challenge. The whole idea of discipline, because people don't have a concept of discipline today in the church. When somebody does something wrong, they need to be disciplined. It's taken as punishment or something like that, rather than something for that person's growth. So those have been the hardest aspects, and trying to not compromise, to just keep pushing, patiently keep pushing, that's been difficult.
Just briefly, what would your insights be in terms of the whole spiritual warfare in relation to ministry? Certainly, for Europeans, we can sort of ignore the subject.
Yeah.
Sometimes we shouldn't. You're in a different context, but what have you felt about that whole?
I think it's. I mean, I'm no expert on this at all. I told the story of this boy who came to Christ just before he got married. Now his wife, his mother, came to us. She had spent all her money going to devil dances to get away these spirits. And then, she was clearly demon possessed. She was in my wife's Bible study. And the moment my wife opens the Bible, she starts shivering. There was this clear demonic. And we had to take her to the pastor's house and pray. The pastor was a fine guy. And so he would take to the house, and then we all pray for her. And it took us about 3 months. She comes and goes. And finally she was delivered. And the thing that really is encouraging about her is that whenever she gives her testimony, she says, God forgave me, a sinner. Very often in spiritual warfare, when people come to Christ, their understanding of Christianity is God gave me power over this demon. And it's sometimes a little difficult for them to understand the cross as the heart of Christianity. This lady has understood that. So I think we have to engage in this type of warfare. We have people who come to church and suddenly, you know, they manifest. So we have to take them out and pray for them, and then after they are delivered, we have to minister to them, because very often the deliverance is very close to psychological problem too. I don't know, that's been our experience, that people are more vulnerable to this kind of attack who are psychologically vulnerable. And so there has to be a lot of counseling that goes on after that. It's not a big aspect of our ministry, but in our type of world, we can't avoid it. Yeah.
So when you come to Europe, which you've done quite a bit, what's your perspective on the church in Europe? And I suppose it's hard as a visiting speaker, you don't hear other speakers, but do you have any sense of kind of the state of Bible teaching, preaching, this whole aspect of ministry over here?
I really don't know, but I do know that all over the world, Bible teaching is being questioned, is under strain. In fact, that is what brings me out. If people ask me to teach the Bible, then I will go. The reason is that there is this idea that Bible teaching is boring, that it's not relevant to today's culture, that people are, I remember somebody saying, I exposit the culture, I don't exposit the Bible. You know, a person actually in Asia, in one of our more affluent countries in Asia. And so I think we desperately need to uphold that. For me, it's almost like death, because I just have great difficulty finding time to prepare. And so I have to stay up in the night, struggle. But on the other hand, this is what has kept me fresh. Having to study the scriptures and to get insight and get excited about what you find. So I think that the greatest reason why people are not expounding the scripture is that, my personal feeling, is that it takes too much time, and our people are not used to spending so much time studying the word, applying it, to thoroughgoing application. I think, especially in the West, I think one of the problems you all have is specialization. Now, I don't know how it is in Europe, but I know in America, you have a pastor for visitation, a pastor for this, and a pastor for preaching. So the preacher is able to spend a lot of time preparing. I really don't know whether that's the biblical model. I think a biblical preacher must be involved in ministry, but that's very hard to do both. And I really think that is the reason why biblical exposition is going out of fashion.
So do you let your preparation be your Bible time, or do you have separate, what are your Bible habits?
Yes, well, I go through the Bible. I get a wide margin Bible. I studied inductive Bible study in seminary from one of the gurus of inductive Bible study. He was called Robert Trainer. His book is on sale here. And so I use that every day in my study. But when I'm preparing a message, 1 maximum 2 days, I will use that message for my devotions, that passage for my devotions. Beyond that, I try not to.
Okay. So can you give us a brief overview of the inductive Bible study when you're doing that personally?
I should have brought my Bible. I have color. You know, I take my color pencils wherever I go, looking for themes, looking for relationships. This is there because of this. Looking for things that are repeated, and I color them. I put signs, and I use a 2B.9 pencil. That is 2B because it's a little, it doesn't hurt the Bible paper. 0.9 means it's a little thicker. Normal pencils are 0.7. So these are my toys. So I have those.
So that's your Christmas present every year.
The problem with people is that they give me, if they are going to give me on those things, I'm so specific in my tastes that they usually miss the point. So I take my Bible and just, write. And then I have a little notebook which I write down what did God teach me today. So that's the way I generally do my Bible study.
Some people I know have a hard time writing in the Bible because of background or whatever, but you just say what? Get over it?
Yes.
Do it?
Yes. Now Nehemiah, I studied on my computer. I thought, let me try to do inductive Bible study with the computer. In other words, I got a Word file with the text and then various other columns and just...
What do you think? Does it work, or do you prefer your
It
pencil?
took me much longer with that. But I thought I need to try and do that because the younger generation are spending all their time with computers.
Yeah.
I must try and see whether this works with the computer also.
So the pencil industry is going to die off now.
Yeah.
So you'll do that every day, and then sometimes you'll do the preparation, but only for a couple of days.
Yeah.
Okay. What would you say, looking back, are some of the mistakes you've made, or as a teacher especially? Where have you learned lessons and then said, "Oh, if only I'd learned that before"? Kind of give us some wisdom, because you're a couple of steps down the road from where some of us are.
The mistakes, most of the mistakes I've made have to do with my weaknesses, which is mainly taking things that I shouldn't take on. Okay. I find it very difficult to say no to people, and sometimes I take on things that I shouldn't. In terms of my study, I don't know. I can't think of anything particular that I can mention. One of the things that I try to do is to, I know when I have failed in preaching, when I haven't got through, and then to ask why, what happened. So that I can say. I can't think of anything else.
So how do you get feedback? Do you just know yourself, or do you ask other people as well?
My friends tell me sometimes, which I'm very grateful for. My wife usually doesn't. If she was blessed by email, she hardly hears me preach. That's the problem. Usually it's my friend might say something, because I'm traveling in Youth for Christ, sometimes I repeat the same stories often, and so they tell me, you told the story before, So working with young people is a great help for me. Now my audience in Youth for Christ is young volunteers and young staff. So you have to, and they come from non-Christian backgrounds, so you have to really simplify. And so to take the theology, to take the high stuff and bring it in simple form, that has really helped me. And today, if I have to speak to a youth audience, I have to prepare much more because I'm a little out of it now. So that really has helped me.
So when you're invited to speak somewhere and you're a visitor, it's different than when you're in your own context.
Yeah.
How much do you find out about the people you'll be speaking to, and how do you do that?
One of the things I asked people when I'm traveling is, please keep me in a home. Don't put me in a hotel. Of course, this is not possible here. And the reason there is that I just talk to the people.
Yeah.
And when I'm in a place, I like to talk as much as I can. I put here I have put off the TV because, there is nothing, I can't understand Polish. But if I can, I put on the TV and to watch the advertisements. Just watch the news. If I'm in an English-speaking country, I will do that. I don't read that much about a country before I come. I don't do that much.
Right. So, when you were thinking about this event, you were invited probably 2-3 years ago, I think you said. How did you decide what to preach on? It wasn't assigned to you, presumably.
Yeah, no. They called me. We had a Skype conversation, and I told them these are the things that I am doing these days. My first suggestion was not expository, and they wanted me to do expository speaking. Last year I prepared this series on Nehemiah. I prepared last year. So I told them I'm preparing this right now. Would it be suitable? And they said, yeah, I think that'll be good. So there was up and down feedback.
Okay, so when you repeat a message that you've used before, what's your process then? To start from scratch or to start with the notes, or how do you?
Yeah, I have the same. I handwrite my notes because I...
Pen or pencil?
Pen.
Okay.
Pen, I should have brought my notes with me. I forgot that. And I have a color coding system because I want to see and not to have to read. So my scripture is in orange, examples, illustrations are in pink, and points are in green, main points in blue. So that if I just, that's why I don't use computer. I can't, I grew up with handwritten stuff, and the younger generation is different. Sometimes I have to give a whole text to speak at a conference, so I send the text on and then I handwrite what I have typed in. Because I can read much, it's much more easier for me to read what I have written rather than what is on a typed script. So the idea is to just see, and I always have one page, the notes, the next page blank. And so as I go on, I just keep changing. And sometimes the change is so big that I have to paste a whole page, the new page. So I take scissors, scotch tape, sellotape, the tape and spare paper. Wherever I go, I take that because I'm changing all the time.
So you're looking at your old notes, you're looking at the Bible, and so sometimes you're changing.
Yes. And like the way I ended today's talk on Europe, that was brand new because I felt maybe that's a message that I can give to the European people. So like that, I will change and add things, take away things.
Right. So will you typically live in a Bible book for a while, and then so would you do Nehemiah in other settings for a while and then move on to something else?
Yeah, that's the value of being an itinerant preacher.
Right.
That you can take a thing and then go here. But I haven't done this series many times, but that's what I usually do.
Okay. Yeah. When you're preparing, you're looking at the text. What is your goal? You're looking at it. Are you thinking immediately of preaching it, or are you thinking of understanding first?
Yeah,
or?
I want to understand. What I do is I print out the text. I have the text like this, and all this is free, and a little space on the other side. So, I have a little space here, maybe 1.5 inches. This is the text, just about 2 inches of the text. And the rest of the paper is free. And so I just keep writing as I go on, and studying the passage. And of course, sometimes the application comes even before you study the passage. You read something and suddenly you apply. So that I don't follow that scheme, slavishly. But usually that's what I do.
Okay.
And I take my notes wherever I go. I'm reading all the time because I have something I learned from John Stott when he came to seminary, when we were seminary students. They asked him, how do you find time to study? And he said, the old pastor used to find time, give the whole morning for study, and then, the ministry in the afternoon. Today we can't do that. So you just learn to squeeze in time. And that's what I do. I have a diary, still I'm old man, I have a paper diary, but I have a lot of free pages. And whenever something comes that is appropriate to this message, I write it down and then go home. If I don't have my diary with me, I have my business cards, my visiting cards. So I write it down there and quickly put it into the sermon. So the sermon is prepared over a long time, a few days. I prefer to do it as much early as I can so that I can just keep adding as I go. And because I work with people who are poor, I have to make sure that my illustrations are from poor, So I travel by bus, the poor travel by bus in Sri Lanka. So I travel fairly regularly by bus, just to observe what is happening. I go on a long trip by bus, just to know that life, and always I'm learning, looking. So it's a real battle, not only to study the text, but to know where our people are. And of course, I think personal ministry is the most helpful there, but also this other thing.
You mentioned reading. Do you immerse yourself in the subject that you're preaching, or do you read other things? What do you find helpful to be reading?
Well, something that Bishop Stephen Neal, he was a bishop from England who went to India and had a great ministry there. He told us, again when I was in seminary, he said, take a book and read it over a long period of time, slowly, 3-4 months. And that's one of the things I do. I take a book I feel I need to read on this topic, and I'll just read slowly over a period of time, taking my notes, writing on the back. I do that with biographies also, because I've never had anyone to supervise my work. All these years I've never had a supervisor. My supervisors have been biographies. I just read about these people and I learn whatever I can about ministry. So that's something. And then this idea of reading all the time. I remember once I was traveling by bus many years ago from a mountain station, and it was during the holiday season, New Year season, and the buses were crowded, so I had to stand. So I had this John Stott's book, The Cross of Christ, with me. Great book. And whenever the bus stops, I will open the book and read a paragraph and then close it and put it on the top there. But it was bumping, and suddenly somebody said, there was a book that fell down out on the road that bumped and then gone out. So I realized it's my book, and I wasn't going to lose this book because I had made a lot of notes on the book. So I told the bus driver I'd get down. So I took my bag and got down. And I went to this place and I said, was there a book that fell? And the people there said, yes, there was a book that fell, and the bus that was coming in the opposite direction stopped and took the book and went, in the opposite direction. So at that time, a police jeep came, and they saw me, and they said, what's the problem? I said, I have lost a very valuable book. And somebody said the people in the bus took it. So he said, let's follow the bus. And I got into the police jeep, and we went and retrieved my book. So it's a challenge when you're in ministry. I remember when we had the war. I'm a Sinhalese, which is the majority race, and it was the Tamil race that was fighting for a separate country. So people of that race were often arrested. And when I, as a Sinhalese, was able to go, I have an honorary doctorate, which I used a lot during the war, because, I had a card with doctor, and so I showed the police and they allowed me to go in because it's doctor, And I used to be able to get some people out by guaranteeing them. But it would take me about 6 hours. So I take my books along, my notes, stand or sit, and I'm writing the notes, studying. So it's been a real challenge to study, real challenge, but it's a challenge that I have to take seriously, because I know if I don't do that, very soon I'm going to lose the freshness.
So is it a temptation, if you're primarily preaching to people with no background, simplifying, well, then I don't need to study because because you're writing books at a higher level.
Yeah.
You're teaching at a very basic level. Yeah. What keeps you going with the study?
There was something that Prebendary Webb Peplow, I think is the name, some British preacher. He had something on his, I think it was Richard Baxter who had said this. He had this on his office. I'll preach as if I'll never preach again, as a dying man to dying men. That was a statement from Richard Baxter, who was always sick and thought he was going to die. He lived until he was about 80, I think. But he was always thinking that he was going to die. And that has helped me a lot. That if I speak even to 5 people, this is a matter of life and death. I have to take this seriously. And I prepare less when I'm speaking like that, because I do a lot through interaction, and they do a lot of the, but I try to take it as seriously as if I was speaking to a sophisticated audience.
And when you do speak to a sophisticated audience, do you then find yourself tempted to try to impress them, or how do you make the adjustment in that direction?
Well, the vision that drives me is I must make the Bible exciting. I must make the Bible relevant to these people. And that's what drives me. I think there were times when I tried to impress people and God has rebuked me. And that's something that we are always, I don't think until we go to heaven, our motives will be 100% pure. We are always struggling with our motives. But consciously, let's hope we don't do something like that, Yeah. I have found that when I write a book, almost always after I finish writing the book, I have serious problems in the area about which I wrote. I wrote a book, Jesus-Driven Ministry, and after that I had some of my biggest problems in ministry after writing a book on ministry. I wrote a book on friendship, and I had my most painful experience of a broken friendship after I finished writing that. So I think it's God's way of showing us that we are not big people. We are just, people who are communicating the wisdom that has been come through the centuries, through the church. We are just called to write it down. And then I think God, I remember once I wrote a book called Sensible Behavior, relationships between men and women in ministry. We were having a lot of problems in Sri Lanka with people having affairs and all. So I wrote this book. And that time I wrote to my friends and said, please pray for me. Usually when I write a book, I have problems in that area. And this is an area I don't want to have problems, in.
Yeah. So you're saying don't write any books? How do you find it? I'm sure a lot of people are probably like me, that there are sometimes where you finish preaching and you think, yes, that was great. But the majority of times, I heard somebody say that preaching a sermon is the closest thing that most men will get to giving birth to a baby. You have this exciting anticipation, the gestation period is coming, the message comes, and then you get depressed.
Yeah.
And then you start again on Tuesday.
Yeah.
How do you find that, the whole emotional side of preaching?
Well, I think over the years I'm trying hard not to let the responses of people influence me too much. Of course, when people say they have been blessed, it's always an encouragement. But sometimes the most important messages people don't like. And those are also important, and maybe God has blessed them more than the ones that people enjoyed. So one of those things is, sometimes people ask me, you're a bit of a prominent guy, what do you do with all the praise that you get? And one of the things I'm trying to tell myself is, it's not a big deal. That is not the deal. It's the deal is that I do what God wants me to do. And I know that in my personal life, I'm not doing that a lot. So I have to battle. It's a battle for holiness. And so that battle will make me realize, however good you have preached, what is ultimately important, that you are living a life that is pleasing to God. And I know I'm not doing that, so that keeps me on the edge, I think.
So do you find yourself often discouraged after you speak, irrespective of feedback, or?
Yeah, sometimes, especially in the early years. But now I think, just because I believe in preaching, I believe that God works through the preaching of the word. I believe that. So that belief helps me to face up to these discouragements. But sometimes, I do get very discouraged.
Yeah. When you look back, you've seen a lot of people that haven't kept going, either through burnout or through sin or whatever. What are some of the things that, having observed that you would say, make sure you learn this before that happens?
I mean, my answers are very simplistic. I think the first and most important thing is that we must make sure that we have time with the Lord every day. To me, I am not a routine person, I am not a disciplined person. I work very hard, but I'm not disciplined. And for me, giving time every day is a challenge. Every day. But I know that if I don't do that, I'm finished. I have no future. So I just have to make myself spend time praying. And when I'm praying, most of the time I'm just doing intercession, praying for people, and reading my Bible. So that, I would say, is the first thing. Another thing that has, I think, really takes away people's effectiveness is anger. People treat us badly in ministry. I think we are all treated badly. Bad stories are told about us. And those people can ruin our lives. And I think we have to really battle anger. I would say that's been one of my biggest battles in my life, has been to battle not to allow anger to stay on. And for that, my wife and my few friends have been a great help. Knowing that I can go to my wife, when people are bad to you, if some other people are good, then you're not going to be angry with life, At least these people understand me, So that would be another thing, having friends. I was very fortunate that these Youth for Christ, my Youth for Christ colleagues, now they are pastors, they are doing other things. None of them are in Youth for Christ. But we are an accountability group. We've been friends for about 40 years. And we meet every 2 months, 3 months, for about 3-4 hours. So it's not, we can't afford to give time. It's really difficult to get to meet. But I have this group that is going to help me. I know they will help me. I send them text messages. And because it's expensive to send text messages, my family has WhatsApp, but these people don't. They are all older people, so I send it to one, and they send it to the others. They forward it. That person forwards it to the others. To know that I have a group that I can go back to when I'm discouraged. But more than, ultimately it's God that we have to go to. I remember my best friend, he was the chairman of my board, and he was the one I'll call at 12 o'clock in the night when I'm depressed. I'll just call him and tell him, I can't handle this, I can't just go on like this. And he would always comfort me. And then he died of cancer. And the biggest blow I ever received in ministry was after I had preached at his funeral. When somebody came and just spoke very harshly to me, it was very painful. And normally I would go and tell him, but he was gone. So we have to ultimately learn to go back to God, to get our strength from God, somehow to find. Another thing I have found helpful is to sing hymns. Methodism has a strong doctrinal hymn, because Methodists work with unbelieving, with uneducated people. The John Newton and William Cooper, they put out a hymn book called Olney Hymns. Around the same time, John Wesley did. John Wesley did a hymn book.
The hymn book, yeah.
And both these, for the first time, were doctrinally arranged. And because the people couldn't read, the hymns was the doctrine. So I have found a lot of help from hymns. When I'm upset, I go and sing hymns, so that the truth that is eternal has a way of coming and influencing me. Usually I play a little. I'm not a good pianist at all, so I never play when there are others around. But if I'm alone, I can play, and then when I make a mistake, I stop and start again. So I play, and usually I'm playing the tune and reading. I'm not singing because I'm so upset. After about 4 or 5 hymns, I'm able to sing again, and to leave never stop spending time to marvel at grace. The most important thing in our life is God's grace. The most important factor that motivates us is that Jesus is beautiful, you know, and we must never allow the problems of life to take away. But sometimes they are so emotionally draining, we need outside help. And the outside help I get is from the hymns.
So it sounds like you're talking about what we call friendly fire, the pressure, the criticisms coming from believers rather than from the world outside.
Yeah.
Do you think that's tougher to handle?
Yeah, I think that is much harder to handle here.
Yeah. So how you've had kind of a multi-sided ministry in terms of the international and the local. How's your marriage kind of worked in the midst of that? What have you learned about being a good husband, caring for your wife while being shot at by criticism or whatever? How's that developed over the years?
Well, I think, there are different people who have different types of marriages. God gave me a very affirming woman because I'm a very timid person. My brother is a pastor and he's much harder than me, stronger than me, and he worked in this liberal church and saw the church turn around. Wow. And not only he, there were a few others who saw the denomination turn around. I could have never done that. But God gave me, because I can't handle attacks very much, I'm terrible at debating and things like that. But God gave me a wife who really has been God's primary means of grace to me. She's a quiet lady, she doesn't go about outside, she doesn't like public ministry at all. And I had to learn to adjust. People expected the Youth for Christ director's wife to be like this. And she was not like that. She likes to work with slum women and, not go with me for meetings, but she has ministered to me a lot. Usually I'm the one who has failed most of the time. I talk about marriage, think I'm a great husband, and then she comes and tells me, that we haven't had a good chat for about 2 weeks, and I have failed a lot. But, I think she knows that whenever she brings it up, I try to make repairs for it. I have tried to use as a principle, if there is a family issue, the moment it crops up, that is primary. I have to deal with it, and I can't delay. I can't wait till I'm less busy to deal with it. So if my wife is upset about something, then I have to do that. So that's, I think, been the thing. I mentioned about how we don't go to sleep until we have settled it. That has been very helpful to me. So I'm very fortunate, and because of that, God has called me now. One of my primary ministries is helping ministry wives and husbands to work together. So that's what we are doing a lot now, helping other couples.
Great. So we're a group of people that are preaching, teaching in different settings, small churches, visiting places. Some of us have been doing that for a while, some maybe just early on. What would you kind of give to us, not just advice, but what burden? What would kind of be in OM terms, you talked about having a burden for a country. What would your desire be for us to take from your experience or lessons learned? What would you want us to hear and think about as we move out from this conference?
That's very difficult to answer. I would say one thing is I have never stopped marveling at the glory of the ministry. The thought that we have been called to represent God on earth, that has always thrilled me. And to maintain, that example I gave, I never lost the wonder. The wonder of the fact that God has called us, however bad people are to us, however, recently I got a lot of attacks from the liberal segment of our church because they did a bicentenary history book, and some person decided to have a chapter on me, and many people were very angry about it. They were very angry that they had a chapter on me in this, and I got to know it was very painful, and you meet these people and you realize this guy hates me, and all of that. But those must never, never be the most important thing about life. The most important thing is that God is ministering, God will look after us. And so staying close to God, to His Word, letting Him feed us daily, I would say those are the things. A friend of mine, he's the Youth for Christ director in Germany. He told me some time ago, an old man had once told him, the secret for long-term ministry is Sunday school faith. If we keep doing what we learnt in Sunday school, I think God will keep us fresh and warm. It's very often that we get sophisticated, that we don't have time to study the Word, to go like children and just sit and imbibe from God. This attitude of thirst, that's something that I really challenge our people. Don't lose your thirst for God, for Scripture, for hearing from God. In one of the churches that I preach at, there is this, my children go to that, my daughter goes to that church, and there is this terrible thing of the leaders, some leaders who go to a shed outside the church during the sermon time, and they are chatting during the sermon time. And it's so sad, because we all need grace from God. And so even if a student, sometimes I'm most blessed by my students to hear them preaching. Doesn't matter whether it's an unsophisticated village preacher, but God can speak to us. So that we just keep nurturing our thirst. I want you, I want you, I want you. I want to grow. I want to learn from the Scriptures. If we can keep nurturing that, I think that will be really good.
That's great. Ajith, I want to say thank you. You've been a real encouragement. I'm sure we appreciate it. I certainly appreciate it. Thank you so much for being with us.